What's happening, y'all? Welcome inside the Fantasy Stock Exchange. Danny and Bush coming at you with the third part of our four-part early redraft ranking series. We're coming at you today with our top 15 running backs for 2021 fantasy football. We're going to be going through these guys on a tier basis, on a how we would draft them basis, and we're going to be going through each of these guys in depth, breaking them down. Danny, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And again, this will be the third installment y'all are seeing up on the channel of our redraft rankings. This is redraft week, baby. So let's get it started. This is the most important position, as we know, in fantasy football. If you can secure yourself an elite league winning type of running back, you're going to be in the thick of things come your league end. So make sure you're following this closely, because there's some surprises later on in particular that you're not really going to expect to be where they are. But if you can get them at value, you're going to see the dividends pay off in the season.
Right. And if you guys enjoy this video at any point, as always, like, comment, subscribe, comment any of your thoughts down below. Literally any question will help us out, help us grow as a channel. And again, if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel. It's totally free for you to do. And that also helps us out as well. So we are going to hit the intro and then we're going to get right into this. Okay, so on the screen right now, you guys are going to see our top 20 running backs. We're only going to be going through the top 15 in depth, as we did yesterday for the wide receivers video. But if you guys are just looking for the rankings, there they are. You can see their color-based tier on the right side is consensus between myself and Danny. The reason we created a tier is because we had a little bit of disagreement in the middle of the top 12 there. So we're going to start with the first guy, the only answer, in my opinion, for the 101 in fantasy drafts this offseason, and that is Christian McCaffrey, running back for the Carolina Panthers. CMC, unfortunately, was a victim of a freak injury this past year where he suffered a high ankle sprain in week 2 or 3, I believe it was. But when he was on the field, he was the same old CMC we know and love from 2018, from 2019, when he was the top 3 running back in 2018 and by far the RB1 respectively in those 2 seasons. In the 3 games that he was on the field, despite being limited because he left early in 1 and was limited coming off a multi-week injury in the 3rd game, 25.33 touches per game in those 3 games he played, averaging almost 7 targets per game, and he had 15 red zone touches in only 3 games played the whole season, and he had 6 total touchdowns. This is a guy that gets freakish volume for the running back position. When you're looking at benchmarks for what we can call certain running backs, I tweeted this out about a week ago, but a starting running back typically is about a 50% opportunity share. A feature back, which is more like, for example, Cam Akers, Antonio Gibson, who we're going to get into, that's about 60 to 70% opportunity share. A workhorse back, which is more like Ezekiel Elliott or David Montgomery, 70 to 80% opportunity share. And then a bell cow, a full-fledged workhorse, feature back, bell cow, whatever you want to call him, 80+% opportunity share is what Christian McCaffrey gets.
Heck, and if we want to make a new tier for Christian McCaffrey, 90+%, we could just make it the Growling Panther, because that's really only him.
Right. And the only 2 players that have done it since 2013 in back-to-back seasons, be a 90+% opportunity share running back, was Le'Veon Bell in 2016 and 2017, and then Christian McCaffrey these past 2 years. The only guys that have ever done that. And Christian McCaffrey absolutely would have done it if he was on the field the whole season last year. In 2020, he had the same level of opportunity, despite being limited in his 2nd game and left early in that game, and then being limited because coming off of a multi-week injury. They typically take it easy on your running back. And for Christian McCaffrey, taking it easy was still like 70% of the snaps in that 3rd game. In the one full healthy game that we saw of him last season with a new coaching staff, we didn't know if they were going to use him the same way. 27 opportunities in a 97% snap share. Don't fade him because he got hurt. He's a running back. Shit happens. Sometimes running backs get hurt. It was a freakish injury. He's been a durable guy going back to his college days. And at Stanford, he was a workhorse there too. So don't fade Christian McCaffrey at the 101. He is the clear 101 in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. As you guys can see, we both have him in that tier 1 on his own. If you have the 101, don't get cute. He may have burned you last year. Take Christian McCaffrey. We talk about generational type players in fantasy football. This is the best running back, at least since Le'Veon Bell, maybe since, to be honest, Marshall Faulk and LT. Yeah. When you're talking about best running backs in terms of fantasy football output in the last 20 years, Those are the four names in particular you think of. You think of McCaffrey, you think of Bell, you think of Falk, and you think of LT. That's rarefied type air. Don't overthink it.
So the next guy that we're going to get into, and this is going to be a tier break from Christian McCaffrey. This is probably going to surprise some people. A lot of people are expecting us to say Dalvin Cook or Derrick Henry or something of that nature. They're coming up. They're coming very soon. But we have Alvin Kamara, number 2. We say project forward always. You have to project forward with Alvin Kamara. And I'm not going to rehash the entire rant that I made in our Dynasty running backs video. The long and short of it was that, one, we expect Jameis Winston to win this starting job and have ranked him accordingly, Alvin Kamara being a top 2 running back in consensus for us. If he doesn't win that job, though, it downgrades him slightly. But again, in that Dynasty running backs video, I highlighted game by game practice reports and game logs that showed why Alvin Kamara wasn't more involved during Taysom Hill's time as the quarterback. And the reason he played a smaller role in that offense was because he was dealing with an injury, and it was dealing with a knee injury. And if you're the coach and Sean Payton, you have a very capable backup in Latavius Murray. There's no need to risk your superstar running back being injured for a team that had Super Bowl aspirations last year. And it just happened to coincide with Taysom Hill being the starting quarterback. And the reason I 100% believe that, like I said in that video, Kamara was limited in 2 games against the Falcons, who fired their coach, and 1 against Denver, who had no quarterbacks in that game. They were starting Kendall Hinton. And he was back to his normal snaps, his normal workload, his normal targets, which was the big concern with him in those other 3 games, in week 14 against Philadelphia, when he was finally off the injury report. And keep in mind that Taysom Hill still started that game. He was still the quarterback that fully started that game. And Alvin Kamara had 11 carries and 10 targets, which is about his normal workload. He's usually about a 50-50 split, 60-40 carries to targets on any given week. It's the guy that won everybody championships in their championship week. And he has that high touchdown upside, that high receiving upside that we absolutely want in Alvin Kamara. And he's one of the best running backs in the NFL from a talent perspective as well.
Yep, I absolutely agree. Again, he is my number 2 running back. And people might think, well, he's got so many question marks, like Drew Brees is gone, yada, yada. You outlined it completely that he was still the same back last year, even without Brees. And in general, this second tier of running backs all have their question marks. Give me the guy that I can lock in to 80 plus receptions, 110 plus targets, and 15 plus total touchdowns. And I think Alvin Kamara hits all those marks with ease. So I will take Alvin Kamara here as my number 2 overall running back, the number 2 overall in our consensus. So we can move on to the number 3 consensus running back, and that's actually going to be Dalvin Cook, as we mentioned. To start off really with Dalvin Cook, the big concern around him this time last year was that contract situation and the health. And everyone knew that if he's healthy, he could string together a potential RB overall 1 season if he was able to be on the field. And we saw this past year. He was that guy. He was that league winner. He was getting you to your championship. He was averaging 23 points per game at the position. Him and Alvin Kamara were really the true league winners at the position last year. The problem that I kind of have, and why I do have Kamara ahead of him, as you guys would have saw, I have Cook at 3, is that Dalvin Cook is always going to have the lingering injury concerns comparatively to a guy like Alvin Kamara. I know he dealt with injuries last year, but Dalvin Cook has, I don't want to say an injury-prone stigma around him, but it is true. I mean, we've had Edwin Porras come on in the past and say that this guy has had 3 to 4 major shoulder injuries and surgeries since his high school days back in the day. Like, this is an issue. If he's going to keep being under risk of dislocating his shoulder, getting into contact, I mean, he's a freaking running back, for Christ's sake. If you have weak shoulders, if you have degenerative shoulders, and you're currently taking on contact every single game, every single play, that's going to be an issue. And we're talking about it at the top of the draft. Do I want to invest second overall draft capital into a guy that has those slight concerns when I can go to a more safety net type option at the top of my drafts? At the end of the day here, I'm trying to avoid risk. And if I'm still getting league winning upside in a guy like Alvin Kamara, I will take him and I will pivot towards him.
Right. And we're being super nitpicky right now. Obviously,
100%.
These guys are all elite fantasy options, and there's injury risk with every running back. We saw it with Christian McCaffrey, who had never been injured in his entire career, get hurt last year. So don't think this is a complete negative for Dalvin Cook, because we still both have him ranked inside of our top 4. We'd still use a top 4 pick on him. But when you're, trying to tier break or decide between these elite options, that's when you have to start getting really nitpicky. And that's why we have Dalvin Cook just, probably behind the range where most people are going to have him at 2, I would assume. And Dalvin Cook, you didn't even mention the fact that he's dealt with a lot of, soft tissue stuff as well, because that's been an issue for him in the past as well. And that's something that combined with the shoulder injury is going to make me veer towards a guy like Alvin Kamara and a guy that we have next in Saquon Barkley.
I'll quickly say one more thing on Cook. Don't take this as a negative for his play. It's simply due to the injury concerns that he'll always have. Because when this guy is on the field, again, I mentioned 23 points per game, 20 carries, four targets, and a touchdown per game. I don't expect that to really change anytime soon. Even though they moved from Kerry Kubiak, they still ended up hiring his son. So expect a similar type of offense to what we've seen in years past. But let's talk about Saquon Barkley. And it seems kind of counterintuitive that we mention it with Dalvin Cook, but we're kind of like looking over it, if you will, with Saquon Barkley, which is kind of why I do have him a little bit lower. Yes, he probably would be higher in our consensus if I didn't have him at 5. But again, I'm risk averse at the top of my draft. If I'm picking at 2nd, 3rd, 4th overall, and I'm looking at Saquon Barkley versus options that I feel more comfortable with in terms of a longevity standpoint on the season, in terms of an overall usage standpoint on the season, I will shift gears into my options. So as you guys would have all known by now, there's already been a report from a leading Giants insider. You would see Jordan Renan on the screen right now. But if he's going to be limited at all going into the season, that's just really one reason as to why I would take another elite option over Saquon Barkley. That on its own, though, isn't the only reason why I have him a little bit lower. Again, having him at number 5 should not be viewed as a disservice, because from a talent standpoint, this guy probably has an argument for maybe best overall talent in the league. But if you combine those injury concerns, limitations at the beginning of the season, and you combine his ridiculously hard schedule, you guys would see that on the screen right now, according to Sharp Football Stats. 8 of his 16 games are going to be played against top 15 defensive efficiency teams, and 5 of them are against top 7 overall defensive efficiency teams from last year. All these factors combining with the fact that the guy's coming from rehab makes me a little bit nervous if I'm going to invest super high draft capital into him. But don't get me wrong, if we hear positive reports about this injury going into the season, if we hear, oh yeah, Saquon Barkley, all sets going into week 1, yes, I will rank him higher than 5. But if I had my draft today, if I had my home league, competitive league draft today, I wouldn't take him above the other top 4 guys I have ahead of him.
Right. And I'll give the counterpoint because I have Saquon at 2. So he's the guy that I would take 2nd overall ahead of Alvin Kamara, ahead of Dalvin Cook. And the reason I would take him there is, 1, his ACL tear occurred in week 2. He didn't have surgery until about week 5, week 6, but that's ample time for him to get back. It's usually a 9 to 12 month injury. And for the most part, we've seen guys come back from it in 9 to 10 months recently. So it's a surgery that is less invasive than it used to be, and it's easier for athletes to recover, especially a freak of nature like Saquon Barkley from a physical athletic standpoint. I trust his ability to come back and produce the same way that he did when he was last healthy. Second, I think the situation has improved a lot more. The biggest problem that we had about Saquon Barkley last year was, how good is that offense going to be? Daniel Jones, we don't really know what we're getting out of him. How much does he check down to his running backs? All that being the case, when he was on the field last year, he got peppered with targets and peppered with volume, and that offense has only gotten better. The offensive line should be better with some of those young guys in their second year. Nate Solder coming back from his opt-out. Daniel Jones should be able to take a modest step forward at minimum, even a big step forward at the high end, which is going to make Saquon Barkley have a better floor from an offensive perspective and be better in those tougher matchups like you talked about at the beginning. But I don't blame anybody for fading him and maybe trading for him after. And you guys would have seen his early schedule is the thing that's really dangerous at the beginning of the season. You might be able to trade for him a couple weeks into the season if he's getting a bit more limited volume and the schedule is really tough for him and he's not able to produce. But nonetheless, to me, I think he's worth the risk. I think when you look at the ability that he has to provide you with those week winning plays, it's unlike anybody in the NFL. We can see Derrick Henry and we can see Nick Chubb do it on the ground, but we don't see them do it in the receiving game as much as Saquon Barkley can do it. So Saquon Barkley, from a freakish athleticism standpoint, breakaway yardage in 2018 when he was last fully healthy was 707 yards, came on 15-plus yard plays, which was the most in the NFL that year. And Saquon Barkley is going to consistently and constantly give you 10 plays a year where he scores a 30-plus yard run and probably 5 plays a year where he has a 40-plus yard touchdown, which is a ceiling that I want out of my top pick.
Well, yeah, like if we're looking at it right now, like again, I mentioned Saquon Barkley is a potential buy low opportunity for the first few weeks of the season. And we mentioned his first 4 games in particular. Broncos 14th in defensive efficiency last year. Redskins number 3, Falcons number 12, and the Saints were number 4. If you can buy him after that stretch, say the owner's not happy, he's not really playing well, maybe he's limited in these games, and you could probably get Saquon Barkley plus if you're shipping a Derrick Henry out. And I would take Saquon Barkley straight up over Henry, as you guys will see once we go into Henry in these rankings. So overall, if you're able to buy low on Barkley, I'm in. The only problem I have is if you're taking him at 2, 3, around there, you're pretty much buying him, at my opinion, at his ceiling, because as much as I love the guy from a talent standpoint, I just don't think anybody can really come close to what Christian McCaffrey does from an opportunity, from a target standpoint, and a touchdown standpoint comparatively to the rest of the running back cores.
Right. And that's where we disagree, because I do think he has Christian McCaffrey ceiling. And I think he's the only person in the NFL that has a Christian McCaffrey ceiling. As much as Dalvin Cook and Derrick Henry and Zeke Elliott and some of the guys that we're going to get into have a high ceiling, they don't have Christian McCaffrey ceiling. Saquon Barkley, in my opinion, is the only running back that has Christian McCaffrey ceiling. And that's why I would take him second overall. And that's why I understand the risk. He's definitely riskier than the guys that we talked about, but I'm willing to take that risk. I'm a little bit more risk tolerant at the top of my draft. So if you're risk averse, then take Saquon Barkley at no higher than 5th overall. But if you're risk tolerant like me, I'm shooting for winning my league, and Saquon Barkley is a guy that I can't stomach passing on when I know the potential, I know the ceiling that he has.
Yep, that's definitely fair. So we can get on to the next person on our list. And in general, this would technically be a tier break in our consensus, but a guy I actually have above Saquon Barkley and above Derrick Henry, as we'll get into. And call me the homer all year round. I got his jersey in the background right now. I understand it's going to come off as a homer take, but man, can we stop disrespecting Ezekiel Elliott? I say this every time we talk about Zeke on this channel, but I understand it. Me having Zeke at 4 is going to get backlash from the majority of people. I already see the comment section right now saying, oh my God, did you not watch Ezekiel Elliott play last year? Like, why do you have him at 4? Some may argue that, again, maybe he's not the talent that he once was in 2016, 2018, where he was busting off the big runs. But can we not just give the guy the benefit of the doubt, considering the fact that his offensive line was absolutely decimated last year, including 2 all-pro bookend tackles with Tyron Smith and Lyle Collins combining to play 2 total games on the year. And he missed his franchise quarterback game 5 and on. As you guys can see on the screen, in the 4 games that he played with Dak Prescott, I know we're going to keep talking about the split all the time when we mention Cowboys players, but it is relevant because that is how much of a difference Dak Prescott makes to this offense. A 33 points per game offense when he was on the field. Ezekiel Elliott still averaged 20.2 half PPR points per game. You know whose total that actually equaled this year? Derrick Henry.
Yeah, I was literally about to guess Derrick Henry.
Exactly to a T. 20.2 half PPR points per game was exactly what Derrick Henry was giving you. And Ezekiel Elliott was only doing this on 17 carries, only 68 rushing yards per game. What that shows me is he's still that back who in 2016 to 2019 averaged 19.4 half PPR points per game. The only real thing of concern is the talent. People might say, well, he was not the same back last year. But if that's your main concern, when the whole situation around him literally spiraled down, why would you not take the opportunity of getting him at value? He's currently going off the board as the RB7 behind a Jonathan Taylor, which is just insane to me because Ezekiel Elliott has proven since he got drafted, he's been a top 5 running back on points per game every single year he's been in the league. This is where you buy the dip. You buy this value. If Ezekiel Elliott plays 16 games in that offense, which is going to be a top 5 scoring offense in the league, B, going to give him ample opportunity. Jerry Jones has already come out and said multiple times that he views Zeke as one of the biggest identities on the team. Do you really think if things start going sour in the middle of the season, that Jerry's going to allow this team to pivot off the guy that he just paid $15 million to 2 years ago? We're going to go over in our draft guide the anatomy of the overall RB1. And Ezekiel Elliott is one of the few backs in the entire league that quite literally will check off every box. We mentioned touchdown opportunity, offensive output, volume. He's going to meet every single one of those.
Offensive line, quarterback play, history of doing it already too.
Targets.
So that is another thing that's in his favor. Yeah, he checks every box. I'm not going to disagree with it. I have him at 7 where you said he's going right now. I would still use a top 7 overall pick on him, but I like a couple guys better, and we're going to get into them in a couple seconds, which is why we had to create another tier for Zeke Elliott and Derrick Henry, because we had some disagreement there. But yeah, overall, I think he is being disrespected. But at the same time, I see people still taking him where he's, meant to go. So if he's at the back end of your first round, consider that a value. But I'd imagine he's going to fit anywhere between 5 and 8 in most drafts.
That's a value to me. I would take him with the top 4 overall pick at this current juncture in the offseason.
Right. And I wouldn't, because I currently would take him about 7.
Fair.
Right. Okay. So we're going to get into the next guy who is in the same tier as Ezekiel Elliott for both of us in consensus. I currently have him a tier ahead of Zeke Elliott in that second tier with Saquon Barkley, with Dalvin Cook, with Alvin Kamara, whereas you have him in the same tier, but you have Zeke Elliott in that tier and I don't. So that's where it kind of differs between the two of us. But Derrick Henry is the next guy we're going to talk about, running back for the Tennessee Titans. He led the league in both 15-plus yard runs last year with 21, 48 10-plus yard runs, and 31% of his total yardage came on breakaway runs last year. This is the appeal for Derrick Henry, right? And you could say, oh, that could regress, like whatever. He did it in 2019 too. So I'm not going to come out here and say that Derrick Henry is going to regress by any means, because Derrick Henry is a beast. He's as good of a runner as there is in the NFL. And he's one of the few guys in the league who I could care less how much pass catching work he sees. The reason I have him at 5 behind Saquon, Kamara, and Cook is in part because of that pass catching work, because this guy had 2,000 rushing yards last year and still didn't finish as the RB1. But at the same time, it's the changes that occurred in the Titans offense that I'm actually concerned with. I talked about it with AJ Brown. I talked about it with Ryan Tannehill. I have to be consistent. I'm not saying that Derrick Henry will be bad. He's my 5th overall player in redraft. But expecting him to repeat a 2,000-yard season when he lost his offensive coordinator and most of the weapons in his offense isn't fair. I don't think he can do it again. I do think he's going to be a 1,500-yard rusher, and he's probably going to score 15-plus touchdowns, which will make him a RB1, a top 7 overall running back at worst. But that RB1 overall ceiling isn't there because of those changes, and that's really why I have him at 5, and not over some of the other guys that I think have RB1 overall ceilings.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree here. Again, we're still talking about a back who had 408 opportunities and loses the offensive coordinator who got him into that type of situation. As much as I love Derrick Henry, and as much as I believe if he's on the field for 16 games, he is an absolute favorite to lead the league in rushing touchdowns and rushing yards. The problem is, again, you're talking about a lack of pass game usage. We're talking about the fact that he's moving offensive coordinators. There's just so much discontinuity, if you will, in that real situation for me to rank him above guys that I really feel more confident in. So anyways, if he falls to you at 6th overall, I absolutely like that value on him. But I do agree that he is a slight bit down comparatively to the rest of the guys in the tier. So anyways, we can move on to the next option. That's going to be a very similar back to Derrick Henry. So you can take it away with Nick Chubb.
Right. And I actually have Nick Chubb ranked ahead of Zeke Elliott, and I see them in a very similar situation, because that's going to be a real argument for a lot of people. If you're at the middle point in your draft, do you go with Zeke Elliott? Do you go with Nick Chubb? I see them in a very similar situation. If you remove the game that Nick Chubb left with a knee injury this season, we saw a guy who averaged over 18 PPR points per game in an offense that absolutely favors his style of running, and an offense that should improve or at least get out to a hotter start than they did last year with the second year in Kevin Stefanski's system. This is a team that should win between 10 and 13 games this season and has made additions to their defense to help bolster that status that they want to be a running team. They want to run the ball through Nick Chubb, and their offense goes as Nick Chubb goes. I think you can make the argument that the Browns offense for running backs specifically is a more favorable situation than Zeke is in. Yes, it's still probably a better offense overall from a points scored perspective in Dallas, but this is still a top 10 scoring offense, I would argue. And they emphasize throwing more in Dallas than they do in Cleveland. And that's where Zeke may lose some value from an efficiency perspective, in my opinion. I know you disagree with me, but just let me finish.
I'm okay. Go for it.
Chubb will probably average 5+ yards per carry, right? We can both agree that's probably what he's going to average. He's also going to have more breakaway runs than Zeke Elliott will. And if Zeke averages 4.5 yards per carry in a slightly better scoring offense, the situation is just very comparable overall to me. So give me the more talented player with a higher big play upside in Nick Chubb. If you pick Nick Chubb in fantasy, he's probably not going to finish as the overall RB1, but I will be very, very hard pressed to see him finish outside the top 5.
The problem that I have with that statement is that we're comparing a 35-40 target back to one that could potentially hit that 80 to 100 range with Zeke. As much as I love Nick Chubb, he's a better runner of the football than Ezekiel Elliott. He's a much more efficient runner of the football than Ezekiel Elliott is right now. But if we're talking about a guy who's most likely to lead in overall touchdowns this year between those two, I would favor Zeke. If we're going to say who's going to lead either of them in terms of reception and overall upside in the receiving game, it's going to be Zeke as well. So It's not a talent issue here. Nick Chubb, in my opinion, may be the third or fourth best overall talent at the position in the league. It's just the way he's used. Again, Kareem Hunt is going to get his workings in as that receiving back out of this offense. So as much as I like him, I can't really push him ahead of that mid first round range. And you guys can see it reflecting in my rankings. I do have him right now as my RB10 going into the season. I know we make the case for Derrick Henry every year, and Derrick Henry ends up proving us wrong. But when we're comparing, we're going to get into Ekeler, Taylor, Akers later on. I just see more upside in the receiving game for those guys, which is what kind of pushes Chubb down. But don't get me wrong. If he is your RB1, you should be absolutely confident in him, especially if you're able to get him on that turn area as a locked and loaded RB1, set and forget it for your offense or for your team.
Right. And you talked about being risk averse. To me, I see Nick Chubb's range of outcomes as somewhere between the RB3 and RB8, which is insanely consistent. It's a very high floor player. To me, I see Zeke Elliott's range of outcomes. He could finish as the RB1 or 2, but I see him. I think it's very possible that he finishes like RB12, and we're disappointed with his output because
I don't see that at all.
of that efficiency downtick that we saw towards the end of last season. I know you disagree with me, but I think it's a real factor. I think he's the least talented running back in the top 10 that we have ranked. I think he's the least talented.
Oh, we're absolutely going to have some Zeke bets going into the season. I can't wait.
For sure.
Anyways, we can get on to another comp actually for Nick Chubb. A guy that I have similarly ranked to Nick Chubb right now, that's going to be Jonathan Taylor. And wow, this kid, man, like he went from looking like a potential bust. You drafted this guy in the third, fourth round of your fantasy drafts last year. You're thinking, well, what the fuck is going on? This guy looks like utter dog crap at times last year. He went from that to looking like legitimately the next Nick Chubb in the last half of the season. I mean, we're talking about a guy who really turned from Trent Richardson with no vision to Nick Chubb in the span of a season. And in general, this was the RB 8.5 PPR points per game amongst running backs that played 12 plus games. But that doesn't even take in the fact of how special he was those final 5 games of the season when he got that full opportunity, when the Colts offensive line was moving bodies like it was nobody's business, like Taylor was getting that opportunity share that we desired and craved for. In those last 5 games, he averaged 23.2 half PPR points per game, which paced out to a full season would have been the RB1, and also had 23 touches, 84 total yards, and a touchdown in the lone playoff appearance he played for the Colts this year. He got that alpha workhorse bell cow type back workload that we really wanted him to get at the early portion of the season. And despite those early struggles, I mean, we're still talking about a rookie back that finished the season with nearly 1,500 yards from scrimmage and 12 total touchdowns, despite that inconsistent workload. We're projecting a guy right now who, coming off an RB6 overall season, hasn't even reached his potential from a full season standpoint. This is absolutely a guy that's worth that mid first round type of range. The only concern I really have is transitioning from Rivers to Wentz. Do we see a slight downtick in his targets per game? That's the real question mark I have. It's not going to be about Marlon Mack. If you're talking about Marlon Mack in the comments right now, get the fuck out of here, because Marlon Mack coming off an Achilles injury is a net neutral for me. I don't view him as anything to this
Jordan
offense.
Wilkins is a bigger threat to Jonathan Taylor than Marlon
Absolutely.
Mack is, in my opinion.
And we're talking about a guy who came on at the end of the season. If he gets even remotely that type of volume this year, he's going to smash our expectations. Again, I have him as my RB7. If he gets that type of volume he saw in the final 5 weeks of the season, he has legitimate top 3 overall upside. I genuinely believe that with Taylor.
Right. And we're going to get into this is a big tier of running backs, right? It started with Nick Chubb. It's going to go on for the next couple running backs or so. I actually have Jonathan Taylor as my 3rd rated sophomore running back in my rankings. So
definitely fair.
I'll give the counterpoints because I know you just touched on what's so great about Jonathan Taylor, and I totally agree with you. He's still a guy I'm picking in the top 10. But the reason I have the other 2 running backs that we're going to talk about next ahead of Jonathan Taylor is, like you said, Carson Wentz is not going to throw the ball to his running backs like Phillip Rivers did. And when you look at how Jonathan Taylor got that volume, it was on designed screenplays, which we've seen Phillip Rivers bring to whatever offense he's been working in attempt to slow down whatever pass rushes, facing the team. And Nyheim Hines isn't going away. I tweeted this out the other day. I'll put it on the screen right now. Jonathan Taylor was terrible in pass protection, like absolutely brutal. He was the worst running back in the NFL, according to PFF, in pass blocking efficiency, and he had the worst PFF grade among running backs. So Nyheim Hines wasn't much better, which is kind of good news for Jonathan Taylor, but Jordan Wilkins was better. And Marlon Mack, also not that good at it, but I think Jonathan Taylor is going to be taken off the field on 3rd down, and I think that's going to be to the detriment of his fantasy success. But again, I'm nitpicking him a little bit just because I think the third down opportunity isn't going to be there. This is still going to be a guy that probably rushes for, top 3 or 4 rushing yards in the league, and is probably going to be up there in rushing touchdowns as well. But the third down usage is the concern I have with him. And I also have the concern of how good is this offense going to be, because Carson Wentz was terrible last year and it was terrible 2 years ago. So the guys that I'm going to talk about next, I have less concerns about how good their offense is going to be as well.
Yep. No, I do understand the risk with Jonathan Taylor, and quite frankly, the risk is why we can't have him higher than I have him 7, you have him 10. So anyways, we can get on to our next sophomore running back. Take it away with that Rams star in Cam Akers.
Yeah, and I have a grin on my face right away because I absolutely love this guy, man. Like, Akers, when you look at his usage, it was very similar to Jonathan Taylor's. He had over 65% of the snaps and at least 22 touches in every game, except for the New York Jets game that he left early over the back half of the season. And he broke out against San Francisco basically from a efficiency standpoint, and right away, Sean McVay was ready to give this guy the full workload. The biggest thing for running back workloads is coaching, right? Coaching has been a crux of fantasy players for a long time. It's the reason Miles Sanders didn't break out last year. It's the reason we get over and over again. We're like, damn it, if only they could just give him the full workload. Cam Akers has a coach that has done this in the past. He gave Todd Gurley a feature workhorse role in the past, and they're very comfortable doing it. And when the going got tough, when it was playoff time, Cam Akers received 46 carries and 3 targets over their 2 playoff games, including a whopping 96% of the snaps the last time that we saw this guy play against Green Bay when they were eliminated from the playoffs. And at that point, it really just comes down to talent for Cam Akers. If he plays well, if he shows out in camp, if he continues to impress, if we continue to be, if Sean McVay continues talking him up and saying he needs an increased role and all this stuff, we could be looking at a guy that wins people championships. We could be looking at a guy that actually finishes as the RB1 overall in 2021 for a coaching staff that loves feature backs, as I mentioned. And we haven't even talked about the fact that the departure of Malcolm Brown is actually more important than a lot of people probably think, because Malcolm Brown was the primary pass catcher in this offense at running back. He vacates that role. He ran 276 routes last year, which was more than Henderson and Akers combined. And that could increase Akers' passing floor because he didn't really have that last year. He was more of the primary ball carrier, the primary touchdown scorer, and his primary value is going to come from touchdowns. But the fact that he's going to see a slight increase, even if Henderson is involved to some degree in this role, is really what's going to make him more valuable. And with Matt Stafford in the fold, this could be a 70% opportunity share for one of the top 5 scoring offenses in the NFL. And it'd be very, very hard to see him not finish as at least a top 5 running back in that case.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I am all in on Cam Akers as well. I mean, this guy showed over that back half of the season that he really took the reins of that Rams RB core. And there's going to already be people saying, "Oh, what about Darrell Henderson?" No, like Cam Akers was that bona fide bell cow type back at that end of the season. So again, we saw it. Sean McVay has already come out and said that he views Cam Akers as a bell cow back. So let's take it from that guy's word of mouth, because Cam Akers has both the talent, the opportunity, and the resume at the end of the season to really back that up. I know people are going to say in the past, well, Sean McVay has lied to our faces before. At least with this one, we have objective proof of him being used in that bell cow type role. So I fully agree.
Right. Again, I want to hammer this point home. If people are talking about Cam Akers and his passing game concerns, trust me, his true value is going to come from touchdowns. Think of what Todd Gurley was when he was in his prime. He was a guy that was leading the NFL in touchdowns, in back-to-back years. And even when Todd Gurley was declining, he was still a guy that was scoring an elite number of touchdowns. That is where Cam Akers' value is going to come from. If he's the primary touchdown scorer on that team, which I 100% believe he is, then he could legitimately, this could be a sneaky bet that you could go out and make, lead the NFL in touchdowns.
I absolutely agree, man, especially if this offense is as good as we believe it is, which I do think it's going to hit those unforeseen type amounts, like top 5 scoring, going to get Cam Akers in his positions to really pound the ball in the end zone, as we saw with Todd Gurley over those years. I fully agree. And Cam Akers has the talent to really back those up. So anyways, we can move on to our next running back to kind of but kind of break us off between another sophomore running back we're going to be talking about after him. And guys, I'm backing on Austin Ekeler. We all know this by now. Austin Ekeler is just West Coast Kamara, baby. And let me break it down for you if you still don't believe in the bald man himself, because this is an absolute stud at the position. I mean, Austin Ekeler is that elite running back that people are really just going to disregard going into 2021 fantasy drafts because he didn't fit that narrative that people wanted to make last offseason and then got hurt this year. So this is a guy I consistently see falling at that turn, and that makes me want a late pick. Usually you want those top end picks in your fantasy draft. If I'm not getting the 101, give me any type of late pick so I can just stock up on two of these elite running back talents, as I'm sure you agree with. But yeah, let me just scoop up on all the value that Austin Ekeler provides. He's currently my RB8. Let's just talk about the usage because he saw 64 targets in 9 games played with Justin Herbert last year, which extrapolated over a 16 game sample size would have equated to 114 targets. Ekeler averaged 14.34 half PPR points per game, which would have equated to the RB10 in 2020. And if you exclude the games where Justin Herbert didn't play and games where he played in 50+% of the snaps, really the only games we're excluding out of the sample size are week 1, where he played with Tyrod, and week 4, where he left early against your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He averaged 15.9 half PPR points per game and RB7 point per game's pace, despite only scoring 3 total touchdowns and 1 goal line rushing touchdown on 18 total attempts in those 9 games he played. Now we enter a full extra offseason of continuity with Herbert and that offense, an opportunity for the offense to really take that next step towards elite, which I believe they absolutely will this year, which in result will give Austin Ekeler more touchdown opportunities. Again, I mentioned it. If this guy nears 8 to 10 total touchdowns, we could be talking about the West Coast type of Kamara. Again, like he's not going to have the touchdown output of Kamara, but he should get overall more usage in general. I'm absolutely back in on Austin Ekeler. I think this year, if he plays a full 16-game sample size, we could be seeing, again, a top 5 overall type of potential.
Right. And when we say 16 games, we keep forgetting that there's 17 games now. So just ignore it when we say some shit like that. Either way, Austin Ekeler, the reason I have him behind Cam Akers, and I love Austin Ekeler as much as the next guy too, and I have him in this tier, and I totally agree with you that if you guys are going to ask this question later in the offseason, what's the best spot to pick from in redraft? Let's say you get to choose. I think it's outside the top 7 picks, in my opinion, because I want 2 of these guys. I want to be able to get 1 in the first round and 1 in the second round, and probably in the 9 to 12 range is where you're going to be able to do that. And Austin Ekeler is no exception to that, no exception to that rule, right? Because Austin Ekeler is probably not going to score 14 rushing touchdowns. I don't expect that from him, which is why I have him behind a guy like Cam Akers, behind a guy like Jonathan Taylor. But Austin Ekeler at the same time is also going to be super efficient in the passing game, probably score more receiving touchdowns than probably any running back in the league outside of Christian McCaffrey and maybe Alvin Kamara as well. So I totally agree. He's a very high floor player, in my opinion. He's a guy that should finish as a locked-in top 8 running back. I just don't know if he can get to the top 3 ceiling without scoring, 14 rushing touchdowns, which I think about 8 to 10 is probably about right for him.
Yep, I agree with that. So we can go on to our next guy that we are both absolutely bullish on. And you actually just published an article over at the Scouts. I'm sure you're going to be showing that on the screen within the next 20 seconds anyways. And we could take it away with DCMC himself, Antonio Gibson.
Right. And so this is the second running back that is a sophomore running back that I have ranked ahead of Jonathan Taylor. I have both Akers and Gibson ranked ahead of Jonathan Taylor, and I have Gibson ahead of Austin Ekeler as well, which, hurts me to my soul because I love Austin Ekeler. But Antonio Gibson, I wrote an entire article, like you said, about Antonio Gibson being the next Christian McCaffrey, and that will be on the screen right now that you can see, and you can go check that out. I went super, super in depth with that. But to sum it up, basically, his rookie season was eerily similar to Christian McCaffrey's, like eerily similar. And he finished right now where we have him ranked, basically at RB12. We have him ranked as our consensus RB11. With all this stuff that's changed, with all the projecting that we can do forward, in that article, I go through a litany of reasons, quotes, clues from teammates, from coaches, from front office executives that match what we saw in Carolina in 2018. Before Christian McCaffrey was a full-time workhorse, he was a second-tier running back, right? He was not a guy that we were expecting to be a 97% share running back or whatever he was in 2019. He was a guy that was turned into a workhorse by the current coaching staff that is in place in Carolina. And the gist of that article all started with Adrian Peterson when he was released, talking about how they wanted a workhorse running back and how they drafted Gibson to be that guy. And the coaching staff really has shown the ability to turn any running back into a workhorse running back, let alone a guy that is 6 foot, 228 pounds, runs a sub 4.40, 40, and has receiving upside outside the wazoo because he was a receiver in college. This is a guy that can be the next great elite running back in the NFL. and elite running back in fantasy. And as recently as today, JP Finley talked about or tweeted this out, talking about Ron Rivera expecting Antonio Gibson in year 2 to make a big jump. And you combine that with all the additions that they made to the team, a quarterback upgrade in Ryan Fitzpatrick for an offense that scored the 26th most points per game last year, that still saw Antonio Gibson have 11 rushing touchdowns and finish as a top 12 running back. They added 2 more wide receivers and some O-line pieces like Charles Leno to help bolster that unit as well. If anybody is concerned about J.D. McKissic, and I know that's probably the primary concern of most people, Antonio Gibson was a wide receiver in college. He didn't know how to pass protect in the NFL. And J.D. McKissic was one of the top pass protecting backs last year, and that's the reason he was able to get on the field. When Antonio Gibson was in college, Kenneth Gainwell was the back that stayed in protection because Gibson was primarily a receiver. And that role this year is going to improve for Antonio Gibson. We already have Rivera saying it. We have the data that I did in a separate article where I talked about he's going to see a higher opportunity share. And J.D. McKissic played 155 snaps last year outside of the backfield. So even if Antonio Gibson, sees a modest increase, J.D. McKissic was still used not as a running back in the slot, in a 2 running back set. That Antonio Gibson is the reason I want to pick in that range because I want Antonio Gibson on my team. I seriously think this guy has RB1 overall potential because, like I said, the tendencies of the coaching staff, the talent of the player, the offensive improvements, and everything is pointing to the signs that Antonio Gibson is the next elite running back in fantasy football.
Dude, I'm all in. Again, I fully agree with this. Again, I was on Christian McCaffrey in 2018. I ended up getting him in my keeper league on that 12-13 turn. And I'm getting all the same vibes that I got from McCaffrey that year with what I'm hearing from Gibson.
And I passed on him because I'm an idiot. I passed on him for Larry Fitzgerald that year because he was the safer pick that year. He was the PPR monster. And I felt sick about it immediately. I've learned from my mistakes. I'm not making the same mistake twice. If I pass on Antonio Gibson for, Austin Ekeler, as much as I love Austin Ekeler, I can't do it because Austin Eckler's ceiling is not Antonio Gibson's ceiling. And they have similar floors. How did
McCaffrey fall to that second, third round for you?
We drafted in July, really late in July. So McCaffrey, we didn't see the preseason usage out of him yet. So he was like a mid 3rd round pick at the time.
I took McCaffrey 13th overall.
So, yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, and they worked out. So I won't complain because he ended up winning me a championship in his keeper run for me. So anyways, I fully agree. Antonio Gibson is an absolute beast. We got the same coach. We got the same potential usage. And this is a guy who was RB13 last year on 22 total 3rd down snaps. Can we just take that in? Can we just draft that? And you mentioned it. They envisioned him as a 3-down back for him, but he just was so bad in pass protection as a rookie, they couldn't put him in there. You don't think that from a 1st to 2nd year progression, he can get better as a pass blocker, as you mentioned.
Actual offseason this year too.
Yeah, absolutely.
For a guy who didn't play the position in college.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I mean, this is still an absolute elite athlete finally getting his reins as a full-time workhorse back. You got to take Antonio Gibson. If you can get him and Ekeler on your turn, go salivate because you're going to win your championship. But anyways, we can get into the next person on our list. And it's currently a tier break, but if we know exactly what we're getting into with Aaron Jones going into the season, I can absolutely see him not only being in this year, but maybe progressing on that 7 to 8 type range. So this is a big time collection of all the factors as you'd want in a running back. He's got the elite talent. He's got the speed, valuable receiving work. He's in an elite offense. The only thing really holding him back, other than the Aaron Rodgers situation, is his overall volume. And that's fine because when he's on the field, when he's healthy, he's proven that he doesn't need 350 touches to be an elite running back. He's finished RB2 and RB5 in consecutive years, despite really having those limitations in his usage. He thrives off efficiency, as I mentioned, and it's very sustainable for him, given that he's used very well by Matt LaFleur in this offense. I mean, we're talking about a guy who had more red zone targets this past year than Mike Evans. He had more red zone targets than Mike Evans. Like, how does that even happen? So overall, the big question mark, again, is going to be Aaron Rodgers. But if you're getting this guy in the 2nd round, I really don't care about the state of Aaron Rodgers at that point because you're still getting an elite talent who, even without Aaron Rodgers, should be a top 10 to 13 overall running back. Again, the problem is that his ceiling would not be up to these other guys if Aaron Rodgers was not in town.
Right. And with like the backfield's going to change a bit in Green Bay. Let's say Aaron Rodgers is there. We don't have that concern anymore. This is how the backfield's probably going to change. I would say Aaron Jones is going to absorb the majority of Jamal Williams' pass catching role, but AJ Dillon might eat into his goal line work just a bit. So I would say it's probably a net neutral. He'll probably get more receiving work, a little bit less touchdown upside, but it's still an elite offense. It's still Aaron Jones, and Aaron Rodgers has the connection. We've seen it already. And Aaron Jones could be a guy that leads the league in receptions, which coming from Aaron Rodgers is probably going to equal good things. And he might have more receiving touchdowns than anybody in the NFL outside of like Christian McCaffrey and Alvin Kamara too. So yeah, Aaron Jones, if we know the Aaron Rodgers situation, he's going to be in that tier with all those guys that we talked about, with Akers, with Chubb, with Ekeler, with Gibson. They're all in the same tier. And again, we'll echo home why we want a late pick, because we want two of these guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can get into the next guy on the list. And you guys are probably wondering by now, where is that rookie going to come in? Are we going to have a rookie in our top 15? And yes, we do. We're going to have that stud, bell cow, first round overall running back from Pittsburgh. Take it away with Najee Harris.
Yeah, and Najee Harris, I'm sure the case is very simple for a lot of people. He enters a situation that's going to yield a lot of volume, right? Benny Snell is his competition for rushing attempts, and
Tone setter, baby.
Jalen Samuels is his competition for receiving work. Anthony McFarland. This is the dude that's going to carry this offense on the ground. The question is, how far does this offense go with Najee Harris carrying him on the ground, right? The Steelers promoted Matt Canada, who's formerly their quarterback's coach, to offensive coordinator, and he's going to implement a zone blocking scheme. And for those of you that don't know what a zone blocking scheme is, it's a lot like what Sean McVay runs. It's a lot like what Kyle Shanahan runs. It's a lot of window dressing and jet motion type of system that the Pittsburgh Steelers, frankly, have run a very archaic old school system for a long time. And that's resulted in Ben Roethlisberger dropping back 675 times a season. And I don't think that's going to work anymore with the state of Ben Roethlisberger's arm talent, with the state of his health and his age in general. So Najee Harris is coming in to take off some of the pressure on him. And Harris, luckily, ran in this type of system at Alabama in college. And he said personally, he sees a lot of similarities between Matt Canada's system and Steve Sarkisian's system at Alabama. It wouldn't shock me if Najee Harris is the RB1 for the 20th best scoring offense in the NFL, though. And that's the concern with him, because what's that worth in fantasy? If he's the RB1 for that offense and he scores only, 7 or 8 touchdowns on the season because the offense can't move the ball, because Ben Roethlisberger's arm is torched and they can't move the ball on offense, that's what concerns me with Najee Harris. And that's why I have him behind Cam Akers, who's going to have a better offense, Antonio Gibson, who should have a better offense, Austin Eckler's offense is going to be better, and Aaron Jones's offense is going to be better. The only real concern that I see with him is how good is the Steelers offense, and how good is their Steelers offensive line as well.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. You mentioned the volume being there. Le'Veon Bell averaged 70 plus opportunity. Le'Veon Bell had a 70% or higher opportunity share when he was in his prime with Pittsburgh. I think I mentioned that stat every single time we talk about Najee Harris, but it just kind of goes to show you. You showed the graphic earlier. That is workhorse type territory. And in general, this is an offense that's already said, you mentioned, they want Ben to throw the ball less. Having a guy like Najee Harris has already opened eyes at Pittsburgh Steelers camp. Just kind of goes to show you that he's going to get the sufficient workload to be able to sustain RB1 type numbers. The problem, again, you mentioned it. What is the ceiling here? Is it top 5 this year? I don't think it's top 5. Maybe he ends up in that 8 to 10 range, probably a slightly more efficient version of what Joe Mixon's been. But I can't really rank him higher than 13. But because I believe in the talent, because I believe in the workload he should be able to get, I'm going to have him here because I believe in the player.
Right. And to me, he is a tier break. We said, Aaron Jones has Aaron Rodgers. It's a tier break because you have more question marks about the situation. That big tier, we have no question marks about really anybody's situation. Their usage is all projecting to go forward. And that's why we have Najee Harris outside of that range. And we can move on now to a guy that has a little bit more questions about his usage as well in our RB14, J.K. Dobbins, running back for the Baltimore Ravens. And I would say his argument's quite simple as well. It's a classic volume versus efficiency argument. If you want to favor the volume of Najee Harris, I don't blame you. He's going to get more volume than J.K. Dobbins, but the volume that J.K. Dobbins gets is going to be worth a lot more than the volume that Najee Harris gets. And the argument's quite simple. Mark Ingram is a free agent who's now signed with Houston Texans, and he opens up 80 more opportunities for one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL, especially for running backs. And J.K. Dobbins averaged 6 yards per touch on less than a 50% opportunity share in the Ravens backfield last year. And the only 2 running backs to do that in their rookie seasons of their respected backfields were David Johnson and Alvin Kamara. And both of those guys finished as top 3 fantasy running backs in their second season, with David Johnson finishing as the RB1 in his second season. And I referenced the article earlier with Antonio Gibson, but this article was mainly written about J.K. Dobbins when I talked about how they're poised for more volume in their second year because they were so efficient as rookies. In that article, I broke down historical trends of efficient rookies over the past 15 years or so, and Dobbins, based on his extreme efficiency, is set to see a large boost, according to the numbers, in volume between a 61% opportunity share, which is feature back range, like I mentioned, and a 71% opportunity share, which is more closer to workhorse volume. And that's the bump that Kamara and David Johnson saw. I expect it for J.K. Dobbins. And I'm not saying Gus Edwards is going to go away anytime soon, but J.K. Dobbins is a superior running back in every facet of the game. I think the Ravens know that. It's the reason they spent a second-round pick on the guy, who they had a first-round grade on, according to them. And we saw Mark Ingram finish as a top 10 option 2 years ago with Gus Edwards in his backfield with minimal touches and off the back of touchdowns. And Dobbins will be a more efficient, more effective on the goal line version than Mark Ingram in that year. So does J.K. Dobbins have top 1 RB overall upside? Probably not, because he's probably not going to see the volume. But his success rate in the red zone was best in the NFL last year. He had 9 rushing touchdowns, 71% success rate. He's not going to carry the ball 300 times. He's probably not going to catch 81 passes like Alvin Kamara, but he is a lock for double-digit touchdowns, and the passing volume should increase by all accounts, according to the Ravens and what they've done this offseason. So he'll be efficient as hell, top 5 running back, or a top 5 scoring offense, and he's the starting running back for it, which will make him at worst a top 20 running back for fantasy. So he has a high floor as well, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we both have him in that same spot at number 14. And it's still wild to me that people are throwing him down as far as they are. Like, every single time, I know you guys already know by now, I know the promo is not going at the bottom of the screen, but with our partnership with Underdog, the amount of best ball drafts I've been doing is insane. J.K. Dobbins' current ADP on Underdog is 28.5, RB17. If you guys want an easy way to make money right now, make sure you're on Underdog, because you can quite literally pair Christian McCaffrey, let's just say Justin Jefferson, and J.K. Dobbins on your first 3 picks if you got the 101 hypothetically. That is insanity. This should be a locked and loaded back end of the second round pick. But because people want to just automatically make the narrative about him not having the volume with the other guys, people are going to take Joe Mixon ahead of him. People are going to take Clyde Edwards-Helaire ahead of him. Like, it doesn't make sense. Take the value. J.K. Dobbins is going to be fine. He doesn't need the volume of those other guys. We make the same argument against Aaron Jones every freaking year. Please stop with this. J.K. Dobbins is a stud. Volume as such. Anyways, talking about Joe Mixon, he's going to round off our top 15 here at 15th overall. And you guys know our thoughts about him on the bus video. If you guys want more information on that bus video, I'm sure it's going to be going above my head right now. But it's the same old song and dance for him every single year. I mean, everybody wants to talk him up, top 5 upsides. Season begins. He struggles at the beginning, and people are like, well, why the fuck did I buy into him yet again? Rinse and repeat. That's been the story in 2018, 2009, or sorry, not 2018. He was actually decent that year, but 2019 and 2020, the past 2 years, people have had him as their RB6, and he's end up just absolutely leaving them wanting more. So this year's different is the mantra of every single Joe Mixon truther. He's alone in the backfield. Gio Bernard is gone. Yada, yada. He's going to get 3-down workload. I can get into all that, but you know what? I have him at 15. Let me give you some positive on him, because I can rip this guy all day. But let's talk about what some positives are for him as to why he's still our 15. So let's talk about the coaching. He does add Frank Pollock back, who, when he did have that breakout efficient year in 2018, was the offensive line coach in Cincinnati and has proven over his tenure with the Cowboys in the past, when he was on the Bengals, that he is a very good offensive line coach. Then you get continuity, another year in Zach Taylor's system, does play as Joe Burrow's backfield mate once again, and behind, as I mentioned, what should be an improved offensive line through additions and those coaching. And then the main one, what Joe Mixon truthers are going to point to, is the opportunity. I mean, this is one of the true bell cow percentage-wise backs in the entire NFL in terms of touches. His opportunity share in 2020, when he played, was actually number 2 behind James Robinson at 81%. So if he does play the majority of the season, again, he should probably figure in that RB 10 to 14 type range is probably where I'd put him. The problem that I have is people have him in their top 8 need to chill the fuck out because he's never shown he's been able to handle a full 16-game workload. He's never shown really the efficiency to be able to hit that top 5. So realistically here, you're buying this guy at his ceiling if you're spending that late first, early second round pick on him. Like basically everybody on Twitter wants to tell him to be. So overall, if you're taking Joe Mixon, where he's currently going, I mentioned RB12 ADP on Underdog. I think that's going to go up because every single person and their mother is saying how he's criminally undervalued currently. You're drafting him at a ceiling.
Right. And we've already talked about why his volume isn't as good as, it should be, because they don't use the running backs in the red zone too much. We actually saw, and somebody commented this on the bus video, that Samaje Perine was very involved in the red zone. And that makes a lot of sense, man. He's a bigger back. It makes sense. And if Joe Mixon cedes any of his, already limited goal line work to anybody else, that's going to be a problem. And same with the receiving work. He's getting a very high opportunity share, but I'm not calling him David Johnson or Todd Gurley from last year, but it's bad volume. It's not the type of volume that we want from, some of these other guys that are going to get great volume like Jonathan Taylor and Cam Akers and stuff. Because to me, Joe Mixon's a far less talented running back than those guys. As much as people still want to hold on to how good he was at Oklahoma, he's not that player anymore. He's an above average running back in the NFL, but he's not an elite running back. And that's always going to limit him in terms of his fantasy finish, because he's probably ceiling wise RB8, floor wise, probably RB15 because of the workload. But at that point, we haven't ranked at his floor. I think he has a bit more room to grow in terms of this offense, in terms of the offense in general getting better before I can rank him in my top 10.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. So we can kind of get off the overall top 15 and basically wrap up this video for the most part. We're talking about the honorable mentions. So David Montgomery is currently in your top 15 at 15th overall, and DeAndre Swift is currently in my top 15 at 15th overall. The problem is we both have them swapped on each other's list. I have Montgomery at 18. You have Swift at 18. Anyways, they are absolutely in this kind of fringe tier of creeping into this top 15. The problem is that they have a little bit more question marks than we want to say. For DeAndre Swift in particular, you don't know the situation of Detroit. I mean, they should figure to be one of the bottom 3 teams in the league. The reason why I hold out faith was because he was so involved in the passing game and they vacate so many targets going into this season. And for David Montgomery, again, this is a guy who showed last year that he's a much better back than people want to give him credit for.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when you look at David Montgomery's usage, it was off the charts. Route run, yep. He led the league in routes run last year. And yeah, Tariq Cohen was out of the lineup, but Tariq Cohen isn't going to come in and command all of the pass catching work back. Yep. David Montgomery showed he's capable in that area. He also showed a bit of a weekly ceiling too. He had a long touchdown, which I never thought I'd see out of David Montgomery in his entire career. And real quick, just on overall draft value perspective, I would say Joe Mixon to me is the cutoff as where I would start taking these guys in the 3rd round. Anybody ranked before Joe Mixon, so J.K. Dobbins at 14, that's the first 2 rounds of running backs for me, at least the way I see it. And then Joe Mixon's the start of the 3rd round running backs. And then you get into David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Josh Jacobs, and Miles Sanders, which is what closes out our top 20. Each of those guys have individual question marks. For David Montgomery, it's how much does Cohen, affect his workload going forward. For DeAndre Swift, it's how bad is this offense going to be and how much work is he going to get, which is why he's a guy that I'm almost avoiding overall, just because I have question marks about his workload and his situation, which is really kind of red flags for me. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we have questions about his involvement. I know he's in the Chiefs offense and that should be a great situation, but the Chiefs don't use their running backs in the red zone or in the passing game. And that's where we want Clyde Edwards-Helaire to be involved because that's the appeal of the Chiefs offense. But Patrick Mahomes pushes the ball downfield through the air and he throws in the red zone. And that's where Clyde Edwards-Helaire really loses value, as much as people want to talk about, look at all the goal line work he could get. They don't use their running backs that way, which is why we got to temper expectations for Clyde.
And when they did he not have like 9 goal line, like 1 yard rushing?
Good when they used him that way. I was about to say,
didn't he have like 9 rushing attempts on the 1 yard line? He scored once.
Yes, exactly.
Stupid like that. Yeah. And to close it off again, Josh Jacobs, Miles Sanders, both kind of have question marks from the offseason. For Josh Jacobs in particular, adding Kenyon Drake. For Miles Sanders in particular, moving off with Doug Peterson, change at quarterback. We kind of got to see what happens with both those guys. But if you're getting them in the 4th round, is probably the honeypot range where I'd view both Jacobs and Sanders. So
right. And so Montgomery, Swift, and Edwards-Helaire for me are 3rd round picks. Jacobs, Miles Sanders, and anybody after them 4th round or later. So the 3rd round of running backs is pretty thin in my opinion. David Montgomery, honestly, I could even make a case that he belongs in the second round because I do have him ranked at 15. But it's very close. So overall, the same strategy we've always had: get your running backs early so you don't have to worry about any running backs beyond the point that we've talked about today, because we had a lot of positive things to say about a lot of running backs in this video. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're the most important position in fantasy. They're going to win you leagues, and they're also very talented players, pretty much everybody that we talked about. So don't leave your running backs to the Ronald Jones, Damian Harris tier of running backs. As much as I think those guys are solid, I don't want to rely on them either.
Yeah, 100%. So anyways, we made it through the video. If you made it this far in the video, comment down below Josie quit barking, because every time we go into recording, you got Bush yelling at his dog because she just decides to start barking as we hit that record button. So anyways, appreciate all of you for making it this far. Hit that subscribe button if you enjoy content like this, and we will see you tomorrow for tight ends. Peace out.
Why you need the money?